preparing to live stream the meeting. According to this, we are live on YouTube. That's awesome. But don't worry, no one can see you because I have put it as a private listing.
Ah.
So there we go. It's just for me to experiment with the technology to see how we got it. Get on. All right.
Oh dear.
Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we are cracking on with Perek Zayin, chapter 7 of Masechet Berachot. Towards the end of the evening, we will need to decide what we want to do next. But let's see how we're getting on. There's 9 prakim in total. And there we go, up on the screen there. There's 9 prakim, and if we're lucky, we can get through 2 tonight, in which case we will be finishing next week, all being well. So, who's ready? Chapter 7. Have I got you all here? I can just about see you all. We are good to go. There we go, there you all are. Beautiful faces, fantastic. So we are going to be talking tonight about the halachot of zimun, of the assembly of people coming together to be able to bless God before they bench. And as we're probably very familiar, when you've got 3 people, then there becomes an obligation to make a zimun before benching. So we're going to be talking about which people are allowed to join together to make a zimun for Birkat Hamazon, for benching. And broadly speaking, what we're going to see is if that they have been eating food that they were not allowed to eat, that they were forbidden to eat, then they would not actually be allowed to join in with the zimun. But if they had eaten something that they should not have eaten, but which was not specifically forbidden by the Torah, then what we will see is that they are allowed to nonetheless join a zimun. So with that in mind, let's take a look at Mishnah Aleph of chapter 7. Shlosha she'achlu ke'echad. If you've got 3 people that are eating together like one unit, chayavin lezamen. Assuming they have eaten bread, they will need to make a zimun and have one person leading on behalf of all of the others in order to proceed on to benching. So let's have a look at now at the things that one should not eat and whether they can or cannot still join together. So we say as follows. Achal demai. If a person has eaten demai, now what is demai? Demai is produce which we are not sure if correct tithes have been taken. So briefly, just to explain the background to this, when you grow crops, you are supposed to tithe different amounts for different people and for different things. There is a tithing, a separation called Teruma Gedolah, not confused with Tekiah Gedolah, but Teruma Gedolah is one such tithe where there's no minimum requirement. You could take even a tiny amount and that would be enough to fulfill the obligation. But then you're also supposed to take Maaser Rishon. You are supposed to take a first tenth. So once you've taken your Teruma Gedolah, you then have to take 10% of the remaining produce to give to a Levi. And a Levi is supposed to take 10% of that to give to a Kohen. So on top of that, you have Maaser Sheni, which is another 10th you're supposed to take. Within a 7-year sabbatical period, you're supposed to take Maaser Sheni on 1, 2, 5, and 6. And in year 1, 2, 4, and 5, I'm sorry, in year 6, you're supposed to take Maaser Ani, which is a tithing for poor people. Now, the concern is that at one point in time, you couldn't be guaranteed and certain that that people were honest and at a level at which they would take their tithes. So there were some people who weren't as scrupulous as others. And so if there was a doubt as to whether food had been tithed or not when you buy it from the market or from the store, whatever it is, and you're not sure if it's been tithed, then it has a status of demai. Obviously, we solved this problem, or I guess you could kind of transplant and analogize what we're talking about here with hechsherim, right? We have certification on products when we're not sure whether we can rely on the purveyors of that food. So we have certification, which allows us to know for certain what is good and what is not. And back then, it was a similar thing. There were some people who had the right reputation, and you would know that they've tithed everything. And then there would be some people that were not so scrupulous, and you couldn't be sure. So you would have to take another round of tithes on the thing that you buy. But until that point, it's called demai. You're not sure what it is. That's what the word means, demai. What is it? So it is not forbidden from the Torah to eat this food, but rabbinically it is. And that's the crux, and that's the key of why demai is mentioned over here. So if a person has eaten demai, or they've eaten Maisa Rishon Shenitla Trumaso, or they have eaten Maisa Rishon, but the Teruma has been taken from it. So you weren't supposed to eat the Maisa Rishon, but at least it has had its Teruma taken from it for the Kohanim. Maisa Sheni Vehekdesh Sheniftu, or you've eaten Maisa Sheni, which is supposed to be eaten in the confines of Jerusalem, or you've eaten hekdesh, or you've eaten sanctified foods, but they have been redeemed. So you weren't supposed to eat them, but they've at least been redeemed. Or you've got an attendant, or some kind of waiter, who was attending to the guests, to the diners, and he has eaten as well, and you are now, even though he's not been at the table with you, you want to include him in the zimun. V'hakuti, or somebody who is what they would translate, I guess, as a kuthian. Is that how they translate it over here? Oh, what have we got over here? A kuti is basically somebody who, they translate it as Samaritan. The Kutiyim were a group of people who converted to Judaism, but it is widely known that they were converting out of fear. And so there's a discussion across Shas as to whether or not these individuals are really considered part of the brethren or not. And so even though for other halakhic applications, they might not be in the same category as an ordinary Jew, what we're going to see here is that they would be. Mezamnin aleihem. You can nonetheless include them in the zimun. So people who have eaten demai, people who have eaten the first tithe, Maisa Rishon, which has had its truma taken, Maisa Sheni, Hekdesh, that's been redeemed, an attendant, a waiter that's eaten a kazayat, even though he's not been sitting with you, and a kuti, who is one of these shady converts. So they can all be included in the zimun. Aval, says the Mishnah, Achal Tevel, if you have eaten food that was not tithed properly at all, it was known that it wasn't tithed. Umaisa Rishon Shelo Nitla Trumato, you've eaten Maisa Rishon that had not had its tithe taken for Truma, for the Kohanim. Umaisa Sheni Vehekdesh Shelo Niftu, and you've eaten Maisa Sheni and Hekdesh that had not been redeemed. Vashamash Achal Pachos Mikazais, and you've eaten with or you're trying to include a waiter who has eaten less than an olive's bulk, v'hanochri, or it's a straight out non-Jew. With all of these people, ein mezamnin aleihem, you are not supposed to count them in a zimun. Thus says Mishnah. As we turn to Mishnah base, we follow on with understanding who and who we may not combine with for a zimun. Nashim, women, va'avadim, slaves, uktanim, and minors. Ein mezamnin aleihem. We are not supposed to join them and count them in our count of 3+ for a zimun. Now, even though halachically slaves and women could make their own zimun if they are amongst enough people of their own kind, nonetheless, they cannot be counted in a group with males. All right. Ad kama mezamnin. How much do people have had to have eaten to be able to be counted? Ad kazais. They need to have eaten at least a kazais, an olive bulk. Rabbi Yehuda Omer ad kabetza. Rabbi Yehuda says, even though usually we would say that the minimum required amount is an olive bulk, since there also has to be an element of this. Remember, we talked about va'achalta v'savato verachta. You've eaten, you have been satisfied, and then you have benched. So, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it has to be a little bit of a larger size. It has to be the size of an egg to really be considered satiated to bring about benching. So that's the crux of the machloket there in Mishnah base. Now we have a nice, juicy, long Mishnah here in Mishnah Gimel, in which we're talking about the different nuances in text of, or in the text of the zimun. The more people that you have, and the more specific, and the more you're trying to expand the blessing of God as you reach this point in your meal. So what we're going to see over here is that as the numbers increase, the wording changes for a zimun. Now, nowadays we don't actually follow this approach per se, but it is fascinating nonetheless to see how it all transpires. So the Mishnah says in Mishnah Gimel, Ketzad mezamnin. What are we supposed to say? How do we make this zimun? Bishlosha omer nevarich. When you have three people, the leader says, right, when we would say Rabbosai nevarech, we, including myself, should bless Hashem. Bishlosha vahu. When it's three people plus him, Omer Baruchu. Then the wording changes, and you would say Baruchu. There. Ba'asara Omer Nevarech Lelokeinu. When you have 10 people, you say, as we say in our benching, Nevarech Lelokeinu. You include God's name in the wording. Ba'asara Vahu Omer Baruchu. When you have 10 people plus one, then again you say Baruchu. Echad asara ve'echad asara ribu. Whether you have 10 or whether you have asara ribu is 10,000. If I'm not mistaken, is that what it says? 10,000s. B'mea omer. If you have 100 people, you say Nevarech LaHashem Elokeinu. B'mea vahu. If it's 100 plus him, Omer Baruchu. The Elef, if you have 1,000, Omer Nevarech LaHashem Elokeinu Elokei Yisrael. Then you say, we bless to Hashem, our God, God of Israel. The Elef Vahu, if it's 1,000 plus 1, Omer Baruchu. Viribu, if you have 10,000, Omer Nevarech LaHashem Elokeinu Elokei Yisrael Elokei Atzvakos Yoshev Akruvim Alamazon She'achalnu. Then you would say that we are blessing the God, our God of Israel. Where is it in the English? That's just going to help me a little bit more. The God of hosts who dwells among the kruvim for the food that we have eaten. V'ribovahu, if it's 10,000 plus him, that's a big suda. Omer Baruchu, then you would say Baruchu. Ki'inyan shehu mevarich, in the same way that he would make the blessing. Kaf onin acharav. They would answer back, Baruch Hashem Elokeinu Elokei Yisrael Elokei Atzvakos Yoshev Akruvim Alamazon She'achalnu. Blessed is the Lord, our God, the God of Israel, the God of hosts, who dwells among the kruvim for the food which we have eaten. Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer, Rabbi Yossi Aglili says, Lefi Rav Akal Hein Mevarchim. He says, according to the number of the congregation they bless. Shneimar B'mak Heilos. As it says in the verse in Tehillim, chapter 68, B'mak Heilos, Baruchu Elokim. According to the communities, they bless the Lord, Hashem Makor Yisrael, God who is the from the fountain of Israel. Amar Rabbi Akiva, Ma Matzinu Beis HaKnesses Echad Merubin ve'Echad Muatin Omer Baruchu Es Hashem. In the same way that we find in a shul, whether there are many or whether there are just scraping a minion, they would nonetheless say Baruch Hu Es Hashem. So it would seem, according to Rabbi Akiva, that the wording doesn't necessarily change as the number of people, number of diners fluctuates. Rabbi Yishmael Omer Baruch Hu Es Hashem HaMevorach. Rabbi Yishmael says that you would say, okay, and this is talking about when you're saying Baruch Hu in Shul, Baruch Hu Es Hashem HaMevorach. Blessed is the Lord your God who is blessed. So he's maybe disagreeing with what you say in Shul, but not necessarily disagreeing conceptually with Rabbi Akiva. Okie dokie. So that is there's a few tough Mishnayos tonight, so you've got to hang in there. Mishnah Daled. Mishnah Daled is talking about if you've sat down at a meal and you've got enough people there for a zimun, then how possible is it to get up and leave without jeopardizing the ability to say the zimun for Birkat Hamazon? So the Mishnah says as follows: if you've got three people eating as one, einan rashayin lechalek v'chein arba. They are not allowed to split off. Right? They're not allowed to leave or to separate, because you would be jeopardizing the ability to say the zimun. The same would be for a group of four, v'chein chamisha, and the same would be for a group of five. What about a group of six? Because theoretically, a group of six can split off and have two zimuns. So says the Mishnah, shisha nechlakim ad asara. Six can break off, but that's only the case until they reach the next threshold up, which is 10 people. Because once you reach 10 people, then you're saying Elokeinu is part of your zimun. So once you reach 10, then you have to still remain with your bunch and not split off. Says the Mishnah, V'asara einan nechlakim ad sheyu esrim. And if you've got 10, you're not supposed to break off until you reach the next threshold, which is 20, because when you've got 20, you can split off and still have two minyanim having a zimun together. So that does have ramifications nowadays, most certainly, because when it comes to the ability to break off and make your own zimun, or to leave the company of people when they might have been waiting for you to make a zimun, it still retains a lot of relevance for us. So it's important to keep that in mind. Now, if we remember our last Mishnah, it can get really complicated if we're changing the wording as each of the thresholds are being reached, of 1 and 10 and 100 and 10,000. Yeah, so we don't paskin like that, but interesting mental exercise nonetheless for Rabbi Yossi Haglili as to how he would allow people to break up if he has such a difference of opinions. Okie dokie, Mishnah Hey, the final Mishnah of Perek Zion, where we're talking about two groups of people who are eating in the same house. Was someone there with a question? Or were they just sneezing? That's so Mishnah Hey, we're talking about two groups of people eating in the same house. And the question is, can they do a zimun together? They've not been eating at the same table. They've not necessarily been eating in the same space. Maybe one is in the kitchen, one is in the dining room. Maybe they can see each other, maybe they can't. Let's have a little look and see what the Mishnah says. You've got two chaburas. You've got two groups of people who are eating in the same house. Perhaps a relevant discussion would be restaurants nowadays. Because as long as they can see each other, they are able to join up. So even if they haven't been eating together, if they are able to see each other, then halachically they would be allowed to join up for the purpose of a zimun. V'im lav, if they're not able to see each other, they should make their zimun, and they should make their zimun, and never the twine shall meet. Says the Mishnah, Ad shitain letocho mayim, divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says that wine back in the day was of a much different consistency than it is now. And according to Rabbi Eliezer, you would need to dilute your wine with water before it was usable. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, his position in the Mishnah is, you're not supposed to use wine for a zimun until you have diluted it. The Chachamim say, no problem. You are allowed to use this wine even if it has not been diluted. It's still considered wine, and therefore it is good enough. If it's good enough for him, then it's good enough for me. And that concludes, Rabbotai, the 7th chapter of Masechet Berachot. So Mazel Tov on completing Perek Zayin. And we move into Perek Chet, the 8th chapter. Now, if you thought Perek Zayin was hard, boy oh boy. Hold on tight, guys, because this is a doozy. All right, so Perek Chet, chapter 8. We are going to be talking about how a seuda, how a meal, would function back in the day. And we're going to see a number of disagreements between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, who famously argue in a whole load of places, and they're at it again tonight as well. In Mishnah Aleph, we are going to be talking about Kiddush. Now, we all are familiar with Kiddush. We all know when we make Kiddush and which order we make Kiddush, and it's pretty much laid out for us. But back in the day, it was not so clear. And they had the question, when we make Kiddush, do we say Borei Pri Hagafen first and then bless the sanctity of the day? Or do we bless the sanctity of the day and then make a Borei Pri Hagafen? That's the machlokes that we see in Mishnah Aleph. So the Mishnah says, Elu Dvarim Shebein Beis Shammai Beis Hillel B'Sida. These are the things that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel disagreed on when it came to practice at a seuda, at a meal. Beis Shammai Omrim, here's machlokes number 1. Beis Shammai Omrim mevarich al hayom v'achar kach mevarich al hayom. Beis Shammai say, first you make the bracha on the sanctity of the day, and then you would make the bracha on the wine. Why do they say this? Because you wouldn't be making a bracha on wine at all if it wasn't for the fact that it was Shabbos or for the fact that it was Yom Tov. And therefore, according to Beis Shammai, you make the bracha first on the sanctity of the day, and then you make the bracha on the wine. Beis Hillel Omrim, mevarich al hayayin v'achar kach mevarich al hayom. Who do we pass in like? As always, we pass by Beis Hillel, and we say Borei Pri Hagafen, and then we say Asher Kedishanu b'mitzvah sav v'sabanu v'shavas v'shal b'yahava v'asoni v'filat. Yeah. So we make our bracha first on the wine and then on the sanctity of the day. And the reasoning for Beis Hillel's opinion is because he applies the rule that when you have two things in front of you, two options, two mitzvot, two brachot, whatever it is, and one of them occurs more frequently than the other, then you always do the more frequent one first. So since it is more frequent for a person to drink wine, be it on a Sunday, be it on a Friday, be it on a Shabbos, whatever it is, since it is more regular to say Borei Pri Hagafen than it is to say the text of Kiddush, according to Beis Hillel, you would say Borei Pri Hagafen first. That is Mishnah Aleph. Now we come on to Mishnah Bet.
Hang on.
Boy, oh boy.
Hang on.
How to explain Mishnah Bet. Yes, sir.
You say the bracha on wine first and then bless the day.
Yeah.
But you don't drink the wine before you say the blessings of the day.
Correct.
Why?
Well, it's you're making Kiddush, so you have to get the whole Kiddush out the way before you drink the wine. You're drinking the wine both over the bracha that you've made to drink it, but also over the day. So it's legitimate to say both brachot. And it's not considered an interruption. Normally, we would say that you can't interrupt between making a bracha and then eating or drinking whatever it is. But because Kiddush is part of the process to be able to drink the wine, it's considered one whole entity.
Okay, that does it. Thanks very much.
Love being able to answer questions. Thank you for chiming in. I appreciate that. Okay, so Mishnah Base. Now, try and bear with me a little bit, because by way of introduction, we have to understand a little bit about Tumah and Tahara, about purity and impurity. I'll try and make this as exciting as I possibly can. But you should just know that these concepts do come up across the whole of Shas. So if we understand in whatever way we can the things that we're talking about, it really does help conceptually, broadly, and in a very diverse way with understanding when it comes up in other situations, both in the Chumash, when we're reading from the weekly parsha and everything, and also when we see Mishnayot and Gemaras and things like that. So there's a hierarchy for purity, or should I say impurity. There's different types of tumah that exist in halacha. The highest level of impurity is called avi avot hatumah. Avi avot, which is kind of like the father of the father, you know, the zaidi of all of the tumas, and that would be something like a dead body. A dead body has the highest ability to contaminate and to make other things tameh. And that makes sense because tumah isn't about dirt and it's not about things that are gross. Tumah is the forces of impurity that flow into a space void of kedusha. I hope that makes sense. So anytime where we create a void or hollow, where we have a hollow of tumah, that is where it can, of kedusha, of holiness, that is where tumah can flow straight away into. So once you have a human life that ends, right, the hollow, the vacuum of holiness that has now been created allows for tumah to come shooting in, and that is why a dead body has the highest contaminant ability of all of these things. Similarly, we read in Parashat Tazria in a couple of weeks' time that a woman becomes impure when she gives birth, and she becomes impure also when she has her menstrual cycle. And the reason is similar, because once you have this evacuation of potential of holiness, such as a life force, right? So when she's had her child, or when she's had her menstrual flow, which means that the capacity for life is lost, right? So tumah, impurity, is able to fill that space, right? So at the top of the hierarchy is avi avot hatumah, which is a dead body. The next thing down is an av hatumah, and an av hatumah is also a very high level potency, I guess you could call it, of tumah, and that has the ability to contaminate anything that it touches, anything that it's in the same room space as. An av hatumah is able to contaminate it. A rishon l'tumah is the next level down. Rishon, which means first. So it's the first level of tumah after the av hatumah. So a rishon l'tumah could be any person or any vessel that touches an av hatumah. So if it was to touch this dead insect or this zav or this zava or a dead person, whatever it is, they would become a rishon l'tumah. The next level down is a sheni l'tumah, and that would be any food and drink that touches a rishon l'tumah. And what's important to understand here is that biblically, there's no more levels after that. It only goes from the av hatumah, rishon l'tumah, sheni l'tumah. That is the biblical levels that we have of the different levels of impurity. However, and this is why we need to have a bit of an introduction. The Rabbanan, the rabbis, decreed that there are things that can be defiled, contaminated at a lower level. So shlishi l'tumah, third tier of tumah, truma, food which is ordinarily designated for kohen, that rabbinically can become a shlishi l'tumah. And sacrifices can become a revi'i to tumah. And apparently even a para aduma, a red heifer, could become a chamishi l'tumah. So even though a person can never be less than a rishon l'tuma, food and drink can be a sheni l'tuma, and the rabbis were afraid for what people would do with truma. And because they were afraid of what people would do with truma, they imposed another level of impurity on it. And they said that has the ability to become a sheni l'tuma. A shlishi l'tuma. So here's the thing. You're allowed to eat truma if you're kohen. You're not allowed to eat truma if it's impure. Really, it shouldn't be impure at a level lower than a secondary truma, but they were strict in order to make sure that people would eat truma in purity. And therefore they said that if truma was to come into contact with a secondary contaminant, it will become a shlishi l'tuma, a tertiary contaminated item. And so what that meant is that people that wanted to eat truma would have to make sure that they were pure. They would have to make sure that if they had been tameh, they would go to the mikveh, that if they had touched something that was a sheni l'tuma, that they would wash their hands, and all that kind of thing. So there are a number of decrees that were instituted to help ensure that things like truma would be eaten in purity, right? So what we see, let's see if we can understand a little bit of what our Mishnah is talking about, because I don't know how clear I've been. But I don't want to talk too much about this because otherwise we'll just get lost. So the rabbis also instituted that hands would have a status of a sheni l'tuma. They would have a status of a secondary level of tuma, which we rectify by netilas yadayim, which we rectify by washing our hands. So this was all as a way of being conscientious about making sure that we were pure before touching truma, and the repercussions are that you could end up contaminating your drinks, because if you touch liquid, then you can make the liquids impure if your hands are a secondary level of tuma. So that is all relevant when it comes to this topic. So because your hands could contaminate truma, because your hands could contaminate liquids, right? So that is why there is a machlokes as to what order you should handle washing hands and handling wine. Okay, so I don't know if that's been a helpful introduction. I've enjoyed hearing myself speak. Let's see what the Mishnah says. Beis Shammai Omrim, notlin leyadayim. Beis Shammai say, first you have to wash your hands. You have to wash your hands so that you know that they're tahar, you know that they're not shayini l'tuma, and therefore you have to wash your hands first. And then afterwards you're allowed to pour the wine. And in so doing, you will make sure that when you're handling the wine, your hands are not tamei, and they are not going to contaminate the wine that you're touching. Beis Hillel omrim, mozgin es hakos v'achar kach notlin hayadayim. Beis Hillel say that you should nonetheless pour the cup first, and then you should wash your hands, which would be, I guess, after Kiddush, if I'm not mistaken. And why do they say this? They say this because you don't need to be so concerned about your cups becoming tamei, because it's not going to purify you necessarily. It's just potential that it could defile your truma. So as long as you keep them separate, you don't need to worry about this. So I hope I'm clear, but nonetheless we get some kind of semblance of an idea over here. Beis Hillel say that as long as you're keeping this truma separate from the wine, you don't need to worry about pouring the wine before washing your hands. And therefore, according to Beis Hillel, get it all done, get it out of the way, get the wine poured, and then you can go about washing your hands and making sure that everything else is kept pure. So that is the That is their machlokes. The essence, the crux of their machlokes is how concerned one has to be for contaminants with tumah, touching truma, touching wine, and all those kinds of things. And as I said, it is a very complicated Mishnah. Hopefully, the background has been somewhat helpful, and we'll move on conveniently to Mishnah Gimel, unless there are any pressing questions. Or has everyone lost the will to live? We move on to Mishnah Gimel. Mishnah Gimel is another machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel.
Hello, can you hear me?
And yeah, it is going to be concerns about tumah and about the potential for teruma to become contaminated, and how careful we have to be to make sure that nothing bad is happening to truma. And the problem again is that if we were to get liquids on our hands, then it could end up contaminating if our wet hands, which could be at a secondary tier status of tumah, end up touching the teruma. How worried do we have to be for cross-contamination? So what we're dealing with here is wiping our hands on towels, or wiping our hands on tables, and then being able to put our hands down, being able to put the towels down, being able to put things down on the table. How concerned do we have to be? So let's see if we can figure this out. Beis Shammai omrim mekaneach yadav. You can, one second, let's move you down a little bit. So Beis Shammai say, Mekaneach yadav b'mapa umanicha ala shulchan. You can wipe your hand with a towel, and then you can put the towel onto the table. So since when you dry your hands on the towel is now wet, it is now susceptible to be contaminated by tumah, but the table would be a safe place because you can keep your eyes on it at all times, I guess. And so you can put the towel down on the table and not have to be worried that it might end up coming into contact with your truma, because you're going to be keeping an eye on it. Beis Hillel omrim ala keses. Beis Hillel say that the towel would become tamei. It could contaminate your hands. Your hands could then contaminate the truma. And so therefore, you have to put the towel out of sight, on a chair, out of the way, and then that way you know that it's not going to come into any contact with teruma. And so that is the crux there again of the machlokes in Mishnah Gimel, of being concerned about cross-contamination. Mishnah Dalet is another, the fourth machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, where we are talking about how concerned we have to be for things that fall on the floor when we are eating our meals. All right, so that is the area that we are dealing with when it comes to Mishnah Dalet, and how careful we need to be with tumah when it comes to food that falls on the floor. And so we see as follows. We are also trying to grapple with we're just trying to grapple with life in general, but okay, let's just give it a go. Beis Shammai. The Shammai omrim machabdin es habayis v'achar kach notlin es notlin liyadayim. So after a meal, one should sweep the floor, and then they should wash their hands. Why should they sweep the floor? Because we have to be concerned about the pieces that have fallen down. Because if they are of a certain size, then it could end up being that these things could create problems for tumah. So once you have swept the floor, after that you can wash your hands, mayim achronim, the final wash, before commencing your benching. Beis Hillel omrim, Beis Hillel say that you wash your hands first, that you wash your hands first and then you sweep the floor. That is the primitive explanation for what is otherwise a complex Mishnah. Yeah. And that's the simplest way for me to be able to explain this Mishnah at this time, which is another way of me saying, boy, is it complicated. Mishnah Hey. Says the Mishnah, Mishnah Hey. I wish you were unmuted for that laugh, Philip. It sounded raucous. Says the Mishnah, Mishnah Hey. Talking about using a cup of wine for Birkas Hamazon at Suda Shlishis, and then he wants to be able to use the cup as well for making Havdalah. What is the process for being able to do so? Another machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Says the Mishnah, hey, Beis Shammai omrim. Beis Shammai say ner umazon ubsamim v'havdalah. Beis Shammai say first you make a bracha on the Havdalah candle. Then you make a bracha on Birkat Hamazon. Then you make a bracha on the spices. And then you make a bracha on Havdalah. Mabdil ben Kodesh Lachol. Beis Hillel omrim ner ubesamim umazon v'havdalah. Right? So that we know that there are these brachot that we need to get out of the way. We know that we need to make a bracha on wine. We know that we need to make a bracha on spices, on candles, on Havdalah, on Birkat Hamazon. But we've only got one cup of wine. So where do we put the cup of wine? Yeah. So Beis Shammai said that you make the bracha on the candle and the spices, and then after that, you make the bracha on the candle, then bench, then the spices, and then Havdalah. Beis Hillel say the candle, then the spices, then you make the bracha on benching and Havdalah. What's interesting is that I don't think we follow either of these halachas, with these positions. And so that's quite interesting. So then we come to the question of what bracha do we make on the candle itself? So Beis Shammai omrim shabara ma'or ha'esh. When it comes to the bracha of the candle, you say shabara ma'or ha'esh. You make the bracha who created the light of the fire. What does that mean? That Hashem gave Adam Harishon the method of creating fire, and that is the focus of the blessing that Beis Shammai say you should say for Havdalah. Beis Hillel omrim borei ma'orei ha'esh. Beis Hillel say that you should make the bracha of who created the lights of the fire. And the reason for that is because each fire of Motzai Shabbos is considered like the original fire of creation at the time of creation. So each and every time we are lighting the candle after Shabbos, that is akin to the original creation of fire all the way back then at the time of Adam Harishon. As we move into Mishnah Vav, we encounter the dinim. We're still in the concept of Havdalah, and we're talking about what kinds of candles and what kinds of spices we should or should not use when it comes to these blessings. So the Mishnah says, you should not use a candle or spices that are owned by non-Jews, presumably because we are concerned that they might have used them for their worshipping methods, perhaps as part of their idol worshipping, or as their religious services. So we shouldn't make our brachas over candles owned by non-Jewish people. V'lo al haner v'lo al besamim shel mesim, and we shouldn't use candles and spices that have been used around dead people, and that is because the candles that would have been put around dead people are there as a kavod, and the bracha that we need to be making is for the benefit that we are getting from candles, and so the two are incompatible. And as for spices, we're supposed to be making a borei minei samim after Shabbos on spices that are going to be a good smell, and not to make a bracha on spices that are being used to offset a bad smell. So whereas they would have had candles around dead bodies, and they would have had spices to alleviate the smell, the other smells. So therefore, you shouldn't use these kinds of things for your havdalah. And as the Mishnah says, you shouldn't use candles and spices that have been placed for idol worship. And the Mishnah says, you should only make the bracha if you are getting some benefit of the light. And that is why the custom has developed of showing your fingernails to the candle when you make havdalah, because in so doing you are getting some benefit by seeing the reflection of the fire in your fingernails. That in some way goes towards the benefit that you get from the candle of havdalah. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah, where are we up to? Zion. Returning back to the disagreements between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. So what's the halacha if you have left your place of eating and you have forgotten to bench? So it says the Mishnah, you have finished eating, you have got up and left the table, you've gone wherever it is, back to work or back home or wherever it is, moved to another room, and you've forgotten to bench. Says Beis Shammai, Beis Shammai says, you got to get back there and you got to make your brachas. Beis Hillel say that that if you've forgotten, then you don't need to go back. If you've done it on purpose, then you would need to go back. But if you've done it by accident, then you can make the Birkas Hamazon wherever you are. Ad Eimasai Hu Mevarich, what's the time limit for you to be able to bench? Ad Kadeshis Akel Hamazon Shebemeah. You have until the food is digested in your stomach to be able to finish benching, which we measure halachically as around 72 minutes. It could be different for different people, but halachically that's usually how we measure it. So we say that from the moment that you have finished your meal and your digestion has begun, then you've got 72 minutes to be able to remember to bench. Mishnah Ches, the final Mishnah in Perek Ches in chapter 8, debating the concept in halacha about making the bracha on the cost of wine. Are you allowed to drink a single cup of wine and leave yourself in a situation where you won't have a cup for Birkas Hamazon? Let's check out what it says. Balahen yayin la'achar Hamazon ve'im sham ela osa hakos. They come to you with a glass of wine after the meal. You haven't benched yet, but it's the only cost available. It's the only cup available. Beis Shammai omrim mevarich al hayayin va'achar kach mevarich al hamazon. Beis Shammai say that you can make the blessing over the wine, and then you can make the Birkas Hamazon. Beis Hillel omrim mevarich al hamazon va'achar kach mevarich al hayayin. You should hold off, and you should bench first, and then you should use that wine afterwards, also as a cost bracha for your benching. Then the Mishnah says, "Onin amen achar Yisrael amavarich." You should answer amen after a blessing said by a Jew. Ve'ein onin amen achar hakusi amavarich. Right? We encounter this Kutian again, this Kuti, who was a doubtful convert. Says the Mishnah, "Ein onin amen achar kuti amavarich ad sheyishma kol bracha." You can only answer amen to a bracha made by Kuti if you've heard them say the whole blessings. If you've heard them say the whole blessing, then you can know for certain that they were definitely directing their bracha to Hashem. If you just heard them say Shakol Niyeh B'Dbaro, but because they're a doubtful convert, who knows? Maybe they just blessed their other god, whoever that may be, and then you've just said amen to that blessing and validated it and given it support and credence. And maybe they haven't actually blessed Hashem. Maybe they blessed some other god, deity, whatever it may be. So therefore, for a kuti, you have to be very careful, and you have to listen to the entirety of the bracha to be able to say amen to their bracha. Mazel tov on completing Perek Ches. And we are going to stop it there for this week. But just give me a second, guys. We are going to pick it up with the final perek next week.